It started like any other evening. My husband casually mentioned he'd be working late again. It wasn't unusual. Lately, it had become a pattern. He was always working late. I didn't think much of it at first. We had been married for 7 years, and I had always trusted him. But lately, something in his tone, the way he spoke, seemed different. There was a coldness I hadn't felt before. His words, though casual, lacked the usual warmth. The distance between us had been growing slowly but surely, and I couldn't ignore it anymore. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. It wasn't just the late nights. It was the way he seemed distracted when we spoke, how his attention was elsewhere even when we were together. I could feel the emotional distance, even though he hadn't said anything overtly wrong. I was starting to feel like I didn't matter anymore, like I was just a shadow in his life. On a whim, I decided to take a different route home that evening. Something inside me urged me to pass by the restaurant we used to visit so often. It was our place, where we had celebrated anniversaries and shared countless memories. I don't know why I felt compelled to stop there, but I did. And then I saw him. My husband was sitting at a table with a woman I didn't recognize. They were laughing, sharing a private joke, their bodies leaning in closer than I had seen in months. She touched his arm, and the look they exchanged felt intimate, too intimate. My heart sank, and I couldn't breathe for a moment. I felt like I had been punched in the stomach. I parked the car on the side of the street, my eyes glued to them. I tried to convince myself it was nothing, that I was overthinking things, but the image of them together, sharing that moment, felt like a betrayal. My mind raced. Was I being paranoid? Was there something going on between them? Why hadn't he told me about her? Why was he here with her when he had said he was working late? I sat there in the car for what seemed like an eternity, watching them, trying to piece together what was happening. I wanted to walk in, confront him, and demand answers, but I couldn't. I felt paralyzed, unable to move, unable to speak. Finally, after what felt like forever, he looked up. His eyes met mine, and I saw his face go pale. His smile faltered, and I could see the guilt in his expression. But he didn't get up. He didn't come over to me. Instead, he looked away quickly, and I could feel my heart breaking in that moment. It was like I was losing him right in front of my eyes. It took me a long time to gather the strength to get out of the car and confront him. I felt like my legs were made of lead as I made my way into the restaurant. Every step I took felt heavier than the last, my heart pounding in my chest. As I walked up to their table, I saw the woman quickly glance at me before turning her attention back to her plate. She didn't say anything, and neither did he at first. My husband slowly stood up, a nervous look on his face. "What's going on here?" I asked, my voice low but sharp. I could barely contain the anger and confusion swirling inside me. He opened his mouth to speak, but then hesitated. His eyes darted to the woman and back to me. I could see him trying to figure out how to explain what I was seeing. "It's not what it looks like," he said, his voice quick, almost too quick. It was the kind of response someone gives when they're caught off guard, but I wasn't buying it. Not anymore. He was stalling. "Then what is it?" I demanded. My hands were shaking, and I could feel the anger rising inside me. My mind was a whirlwind of emotions, but the most prominent feeling was hurt. How long had this been going on? How could he sit there telling me that it wasn't what it looked like when everything about this situation screamed otherwise? The woman, sensing the tension, stood up and excused herself, leaving us alone at the table. It was just the two of us now, and the silence between us was deafening. I stared at him, waiting for him to tell me the truth. I wanted answers. I needed answers. He took a deep breath before finally speaking. I didn't know how to tell you," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I've just been confiding in her, and we've been working on a project together, and I know I should have told you, but..." He trailed off, looking at me with guilt in his eyes. "But what?" I asked, my voice barely audible. The pain in my chest was overwhelming, and I could feel my hands trembling. Why was I sitting here with her when you should have been at work? "I didn't want to hurt you," he said, his voice filled with regret. "I didn't want to admit that things between us weren't right. I thought maybe if I didn't tell you, it wouldn't be real, but it is. I've been feeling so distant from you lately, and I didn't know how to fix it." I stood there frozen, unable to process what he had just said. The betrayal wasn't in the form of another woman in his life. It was the fact that he hadn't been honest with me, that he hadn't come to me when things started to go wrong. Instead, he sought solace in someone else, and I wasn't sure if I could forgive that. That night, when we got home, I couldn't bring myself to speak to him right away. I just sat in the living room, staring at the floor. I didn't know what to feel. The anger had dissipated, but it had left behind something worse: hurt. It wasn't the physical act of infidelity that had broken me. It was the emotional betrayal. The feeling that he had shut me out, had kept something so important from me. After what felt like an eternity, he finally sat down next to me. We didn't speak at first. The silence was too thick, too heavy. But then he spoke, his voice filled with shame and sorrow. "I'm sorry," he said softly. "I know I've messed up. I didn't mean to hurt you. But I've been feeling like I was losing you, like I wasn't enough anymore. The distance between us has been growing for months, and I didn't know how to fix it. I thought if I didn't talk to someone, I'd lose everything. I didn't want to lose you." I felt a lump form in my throat as he spoke. I didn't know what to say. The truth hit me harder than I expected. It wasn't an affair. It wasn't about cheating. It was about fear. His fear that I was slipping away from him, my fear that he was slipping away from me. Neither of us had been brave enough to confront the distance growing between us, so we had both lived in silence, afraid to admit the truth. And now, here we are, on the brink of losing each other because we hadn't communicated. We spent the rest of the night talking, and it was the most painful but necessary conversation we had ever had. It wasn't easy to hear the truth, to listen to him admit that he had been feeling neglected, but it also opened my eyes. We had both been in our own worlds, living in fear, assuming that the other was no longer invested in the relationship. As we talked, we began to realize that we had both contributed to the growing gap between us. We had stopped communicating, stopped trying to understand each other. We had let our insecurities build walls instead of bridges. And yet, even with all the pain, I could still feel the love we shared. It was buried under layers of hurt, but it was still there. We cried together, not just for what we had almost lost, but for what we still had. We promised each other we would stop living in silence and stop assuming the worst. We would rebuild together. It wouldn't be easy, but it would be worth it. In the days that followed, we made a pact to be more open, to communicate honestly about everything. We had been living in silence for too long, too afraid of confronting the truth. But now, we were ready to face it. It wasn't an easy process. We stumbled along the way, made mistakes, and had setbacks. But each conversation brought us closer. We slowly rebuilt the trust we had lost, piece by piece. and begin to find our way back to each other. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. And for the first time in months, I felt hopeful about our future. We still had work to do, but we were willing to do it together. In the end, we didn't let fear tear us apart. Instead, we let it bring us closer. If you enjoyed this, make sure to like and subscribe for more stories.